Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce you now. Dr. Nathan Bryan was the first to describe nitrite and nitrate as indispensable nutrients required for optimal cardiovascular health. He was also the first to demonstrate and discover an endocrine function of nitric oxide, creating a technology that is now validated in 6 published clinical trials. He is also a successful entrepreneur who has commercialized his nitric oxide technology through the formation of N101, formerly Pneuma nitric oxide, whose products can be found online. Dr. Nathan Bryan has been involved in nitric oxide research for the past 18 years and has made many seminal discoveries in the field. These discoveries and findings have transformed the development and safe and effective functional bioactive natural products in the treatment and prevention of human disease and may provide the basis for new preventative or therapeutic strategies in many chronic diseases. Dr. Bryan has published a number of highly cited papers and authored or edited several books, including his latest book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life. Dr. Nathan Bryan, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Casey, thanks so much for having me. Great to be with
Told
you.
you I was going to stumble through your introduction, man.
No, he did great.
A
Did
lot of
great.
big words. Such an interesting topic today. I'm really curious to learn about nitric oxide from you today. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there and a few words people recognize in the introduction where we said, nitrate, nitrite are actually healthy for you when we've been,
That's right.
kind of told other stories, which I'm super curious to talk to you about. But before we do, I think your story is really interesting and nuanced as far as like how you were brought up, how you were raised. You went through some challenges early in life that helped kind of shape the rest of your career. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
Yeah, I think look, life's been a journey. I think it's a journey for all of us. I grew up in a small town, Texas, just outside of Austin. Grew up in a loving family. My parents divorced, I think, when I was 4 to 5 years old. So, went back and forth, and I think by the time I was in sixth grade, I'd went to 5 different schools, so we moved around a lot, and that taught us early on, my brother and I, we had to be pretty adaptive and be able to make new friends and be able to adapt to new environments. But that gave us a lot of resolve. And then when I was 10 years old, my dad had a serious car accident, left him paralyzed from the waist down. I was in the hospital for 6 or 8 months, kind of touch and go if he would live or not. So my dad was an entrepreneur, self-employed, no health insurance, and obviously an accident like that, had a financial toll on the family. And so, during school, my brother and I were on the free lunch program. We were in welfare, and we had to go to work early on to help pay the bills because dad couldn't work and still had to put food on the table. So, we developed a sense of independence early on. And then I think when I was a sophomore in high school, my brother was a senior. We got our own apartment, because dad was working somewhere else, and we had to, kind of take care of ourselves. And so, then the last 2 years of high school, I kept the apartment after my brother graduated and worked 2 jobs, finished high school, top of my class. And so, yeah, I think I was the only kid in high school who could sign his own report cards because I didn't have any adult supervision. But, that taught me a strong sense of independence and accountability and responsibility at a time when, most kids were, playing video games and playing sports. And after school, I had to go to work to pay the bills.
Yeah, wow. That's super interesting. I think it's a little shocking in 2025 or 2026 to hear that somebody was, living on their own independently with an older brother, but when they were a sophomore in high school. But like you said, you get put in situations and sink or swim, and you kind of learn to adapt and work. And especially given what you're doing today, it's really formative. And I think it's a really interesting part of your story.
Yeah, look, I think, it's not what happens to us that matters. It's how we respond to it. And I've this belief now that these things happen for us, not to us. And, I think God has a plan and we have to trust that plan and do the best we can in the circumstances we're given.
Yeah, I love that, man. Great philosophy. Tell us how you got interested in medicine and wanted to continue your education.
I grew up in a very small town. I think we had 100 kids, 103 kids in a graduating class. And, I made good grades without having to study. And, my counselor said, well, you should be an engineer because you're good at science and math. I'm like, okay. So I was at the University of Texas at Austin in civil engineering. And first semester, I was like, what is engineering? I mean, what do civil engineers do? And then I said, well, build bridges, build things. And I go, well, I'm not interested in that. I was always interested in science and kind of biology. And so I transferred into the Natural College of Natural Science and finished a degree in biochemistry at UT Austin. But during that time, during my undergraduate studies, I got the chance to do undergraduate research in biochemistry and really learned, how to ask important questions, design experiments to answer those questions, and, experience this feeling of discovery. And there's no better feeling than discovery. So from there, I went and I realized that with a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, the job market wasn't great. I was married at the time; it's very difficult. I enrolled in a PhD program at Texas A&M in biochemistry and biophysics, and then went through a divorce and kind of abandoned that program, and really took the next couple of years to try to find myself and really what I wanted to do in life and how to recover from not my first failure, but a failed marriage is a big failure, and how do you overcome that? So then I was a student and I enrolled at LSU School of Medicine in Shreveport, Louisiana, in a PhD program in molecular and cellular physiology, and there it was where I was introduced into the science of nitric oxide. And in 1998, a Nobel Prize had been awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide, so we knew it was an important molecule. And so that was my first introduction, I guess late 90s, early 2000s. And so really my PhD was on trying to develop analytical techniques where we could detect nitric oxide gas, which when it's produced inside the body is gone in less than a second. So my challenge was, when nitric oxide is produced, where does it go? What does it become? And how does it signal? And I finished my PhD in about 2.5 years. And then I went to Boston, did a fellowship in cardiology and vascular biology at Boston Medical Center. Again, continuing on nitric oxide in vascular biology. And then from there, I was recruited by Fred Murad, one of the guys who shared the Nobel Prize, as a professor of molecular medicine at the UT Medical School in Houston. And there, I just, had all these ideas and concepts that I wanted to test out. And so for the first year, I just did experiments, wrote patent applications, invention disclosures, and started submitting patents through the university. And really what I discovered was a way to produce nitric oxide. So the guys that won the Nobel Prize discovered that nitric oxide is a naturally produced molecule, a signaling molecule. And what I had discovered was a way to deliver nitric oxide gas in an outpatient setting. And so that started this kind of journey from academics, discovery, to entrepreneurship and productizing the discoveries into, safe and effective product technology that, we've got consumer products on the market, but my job from day one has always been to understand the mechanism of disease to the extent that we can develop rational therapies. So now we've got drug products, drug technology that we're working through the FDA to get these products, this technology approved for things like heart disease, the number one killer of men and women worldwide, Alzheimer's. Nitric oxide will completely eradicate Alzheimer's because it addresses root cause of Alzheimer's. So we've got a drug for Alzheimer's. And then we make a topical drug for diabetic ulcers and non-healing wounds. 60 something thousand Americans die every year in nursing homes from wounds that get infected and they die of sepsis. And to me, that's unacceptable because we can do better. And there's technology out there that we can do better and keep these patients alive and heal these non-healing wounds. So that's what gets me up every day with excitement and purpose, is moving this technology forward and really, like these conversations, building awareness around nitric oxide because too few people know what this molecule is.
I think a lot of people have heard about it, but don't really know what it is, what it's done. You mentioned the Nobel Prizes being awarded in the late 90s. Did we know
Yeah.
much about nitric oxide before then, and it was only those discoveries that kind of brought it to light a little bit more? Or is this just such a recent discovery?
The first kind of, I guess, modern discovery on nitric oxide happened in the 70s. And that's what led to Fred Murad winning a Nobel Prize because he was really looking at things like nitroglycerin and what we call organic nitrates. And so these drugs had been used for over 100 years for the treatment of acute angina. And so physicians used these drugs because they worked. They dilated the blood vessels of the coronary arteries and relieved the ischemic pain known as angina. But no one knew how these drugs work. And so it was Dr. Murad who discovered that these drugs are metabolized into nitric oxide. They activate an enzyme called guanylyl cyclase and then dilate the blood vessels of the coronary arteries. And he invoked a mechanism by the release of nitric oxide, although he didn't have any evidence. But he called these nitrovasodilators. So that was in 1977. And then in 1980, Bob Furchgott discovered that the endothelial cells, the cells that line all blood vessels throughout the body, produced a substance that causes blood vessels to relax. He called this endothelium-derived relaxing factor. So then in 1987, Louis Ignarro discovered that EDRF is nitric oxide. So that really was the pieces of the puzzle had been put together because whether you give a nitric oxide releasing drug or you stimulate endogenous nitric oxide production, then it leads to smooth muscle relaxation, vasodilation, and we can now improve blood flow and oxygen delivery. But yeah, it dates back to probably the 1970s. But even before that, we knew of photo relaxation, for example, that certain wavelengths of light can dilate blood vessels and lower lower blood pressure. And now we know that photo relaxation is due to nitric oxide. But that was really, it takes time and a series of really independent programs of discovery that when you start to put the pieces of the puzzle together, the mechanism becomes very clear. And today we have a clear understanding of how nitric oxide is produced, what leads to a loss of its natural production. Then we see the clinical manifestations of that in sick patients.
Got it. Okay, interesting. So the primary function of nitric oxide is to dilate blood vessels. Is that the correct understanding?
Well, I think it's still a very important function of nitric oxide, and it was the first function discovered on how it works. But nitric oxide is much more than a vasodilator. It affects the structure of hemoglobin for oxygen delivery. It mobilizes our own stem cells. So when you have nitric oxide, you have more stem cells in circulation, so we can repair and replace dysfunctional cells. We can recover from injury much faster. It prevents our telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes, from getting shorter, so we live longer. And it activates our mitochondria, so the energy-producing organelles of the cells become more efficient. So we have more energy, cellular energy. When you have more cellular energy, the human has more energy. Um, so there's a laundry list of the mechanisms and really the physiological actions and effects of nitric oxide, but it's still a primary vasodilator.
Got it. Okay. So that's very interesting. And I think any bum listening can probably deduce from what you said, like what problems could arise. But just to clarify, like what chronic diseases do you believe are related to a lack of nitric oxide?
Well, we know that cardiovascular disease is a result or consequence of insufficient nitric oxide production. And that's the number one killer of men and women worldwide, which is huge. And then, but what we're seeing, there's a hierarchy of symptoms and diseases that develop. And so we'll go through this because I think, our body talks to us. We just have to listen. And, and so typically the first symptoms that occur when our body becomes compromised in the ability to produce nitric oxide is erectile dysfunction. Because if we lose the ability to dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs in both men and women, we develop sexual dysfunction or erectile dysfunction. And it's not just a male disease, it's a female disorder as well. And then number two, our blood pressure starts to go up. And today, 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. And this is due to an inability to produce nitric oxide to dilate the blood vessels. So when you can't make nitric oxide, your blood vessels become smaller. Now you've got the same volume of blood going through smaller pipes, and simple laws of physics tell us that pressure goes up. And then number three, you start to develop insulin resistance and diabetes. So type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. Because when insulin binds to the insulin receptors on the cell to bring glucose into the cell, that cell has to be able to make nitric oxide. And if it can't, the cell becomes resistant to insulin resistance, and then we develop diabetes. And then number four, you start to develop exercise intolerance. Can't maintain an exercise regimen and get short of breath walking across the room or up a flight of steps. And then fifthly, you start to get mild cognitive impairment, dementia, and Alzheimer's. Because again, Alzheimer's is a metabolic vascular disease. It's diabetes type 3, it's insulin resistance in the brain, and it's focal ischemia. And so when we give nitric oxide, we improve glucose uptake, we perfuse the brain, and we don't get misfolding of proteins, we don't get amyloid plaque or tau tangles, and we don't lose our memory.
Uh, Pretty important stuff there. Do you ever marvel that it's 2026? The number one killer in America is still heart disease. Yet it was, 60, 70 years ago that we decided the problem was cholesterol and that, developing drugs like statins, lowering cholesterol. We've been at this for decades and decades. Yet today, the number one killer of Americans is still heart disease after all this time. Does it ever just strike you as super bizarre?
No, it does, because as you mentioned, I spent 25 years in academia. I mean, understanding and trying to develop discover a mechanism of action of what leads to cardiovascular disease or heart disease. And nowhere in the mechanism of cardiovascular disease is cholesterol a culprit. You know why our body makes cholesterol? Because we need it. And the people who live the longest have cholesterol between 240 and 260. But yet today, physicians want to get your cholesterol below 200. And if cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease, why are we targeting it? And all you have to do is look at the numbers. And the statins, the HMG CoA reductase inhibitors, which these are inhibiting the rate limiting step in cholesterol synthesis in the human body, were approved in the late 80s. And the American Heart Association, there was a lot of excitement around there because associations, there's some associations, although they're very poor associations. So the American Heart Association said, if we can treat cholesterol with these statins, and these are in the late 80s, by the turn of the century, by the year 2000, we will completely eradicate cardiovascular disease. And what we've tracked over the years are the number of what we call PCIs, percutaneous coronary interventions. And in the 1980s, we were doing about 300 to 400 of those over about a 4-year period. And now, if you look today, we're doing about 1,600 PCIs per year in the US. So, number one, treating cholesterol has not affected, in fact, it's accelerated the rate of cardiovascular disease. It's accelerated the rate of all-cause mortality because if you don't have cholesterol, you can't make vitamin D. You become immunocompromised. If you can't make cholesterol, you can't make estrogen in women, you can't make testosterone in men. There's an epidemic of hormone disorders, and you can't maintain the integrity of the cell membrane because this bilipid or this phospholipid bilayer, you have to have cholesterol in there to maintain a cellular potential, to maintain the insulator effects and the intracellular, the transmembrane signal transduction. So lowering cholesterol is probably the worst thing I could ever imagine doing for human physiology. Yet, if you go to your primary care doctor or cardiologist, they want to put you on a cholesterol lowering medication. But yet they're ignoring the data because what I look at is risk benefit. What are the benefits of lowering cholesterol versus the risk? And what are the benefits? There are no benefits. If you look at the dozens of trials and the meta-analysis in primary, secondary, tertiary prevention of cardiovascular disease, there is no benefit. What's the risk? Diabetes, muscle aches and pains and cramps. They're mitochondrial toxicants. They're causing cancers. So in any decision you make, if there's no benefit and it's all risk, that's a very easy quotient. You don't do it. And that's the frustration. And I think it's one of the biggest myths ever perpetuated in the medical sciences that cholesterol causes heart disease. And it
Yeah.
doesn't. So why are we treating it? And I think today it's malpractice. It's negligence and malpractice to give patients cholesterol-lowering medications for the treatment of heart disease.
Strong statement, but I agree with you 100%. I think that is the linchpin that the entire medical and pharmaceutical companies have to rely on to this day and keep that, kind of lie going. So
It's
many
a
things
great
pivot on that.
No, it's a great financial model for them because if you lower your cholesterol, you're going to develop erectile dysfunction. You're going to develop hormone disorders and ED. You're going to develop diabetes, and you're going to develop some metabolic disorders that eventually cancer. So that's going to put you on a very slippery slope to need more drug therapy to treat the symptoms associated with cholesterol deficiency. So you're going to increase the share of wallet of that customer. You're going to increase the lifetime value of that customer. And that's what for-profit companies do. And big pharma is the best at it. They participate in a multi-trillion-dollar global industry and they get you on this hamster wheel and they never let you off. And we got to do better. We can do better.
Yeah, well said. I really appreciate that. Going back to nitric oxide, is it fair to say that this is a more modern problem? And if so, what has happened in our lives and lifestyles that have caused such a problem as far as nitric oxide deficiency goes?
Well, once we understood how the human body makes nitric oxide, then we could begin interrogating what leads to a loss of its natural production. Right. And so we know that there's an enzyme found in the lining of the blood vessels. In fact, it's found in many cell types throughout the body. But we understand the enzymology and the biochemistry of this enzyme. And so things like a high sugar diet, high carbohydrate diet, sugar sticks to things. It sticks to hemoglobin. We see that as hemoglobin A1C. But it also sticks to other enzymes, the nitric oxide synthase enzymes. So enzymes, as a biochemist, enzymes have to undergo conformational change and transfer electrons from one molecule to another. And if it's stuck together with glucose or glue or sugar, it can't do its job. So we develop these enzymopathies. So high sugar, high carbohydrate diet disrupts it. Drug therapy disrupts it. Cholesterol-lowering medication inhibits nitric oxide production. Things like antacids, the proton pump inhibitors, shut down nitric oxide production. And then we've also discovered about several decades ago that the bacteria that live in and on our body produce nitric oxide. So now anything that's antiseptic, like overuse of antibiotics, antiseptic mouthwash, antibacterial soaps, wipes that kill the bacteria on the skin, fluoride in the drinking water, fluoride in the toothpaste. It's a neurotoxin, it's an antiseptic, and it kills your thyroid function. So all of these things we've been able, and others have been able to demonstrate that it kills the bacteria, the good bacteria, decreases nitric oxide production, and now we have clear data showing that people who use mouthwash kills the good bacteria in the mouth, decreases nitric oxide production, their blood pressure goes up. 2 out of 3 Americans use mouthwash every day, and 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. This is not only an association, it's causation. And so if you're using mouthwash, you have to stop. If you have fluoride in your drinking water, which 72% of the municipalities in the US have fluoride in the drinking water, so we got to do better. Again, fluoride provides no benefit. And what's the risk? Kills the bacteria in your body, on your body, shuts down your thyroid function, and it's a neurotoxin. So we have to get rid of fluoride. And then if you're taking an antacid, you must stop. We have to, your body cannot do its job without stomach acid production. And there are 200 million prescriptions written for antacids every year, and 2 out of 3 Americans take an over-the-counter antacid. And we wonder why we're sick. Without stomach acid, you can't break down proteins into amino acids. You can't absorb iron, selenium, chromium, iodine, zinc, B vitamins, and it's causing severe chronic disease. And we got to do better.
Wow. Okay, I have several questions for you there. I'm fortunate. I live here in Utah. We passed a law last year that forbade fluoride in our drinking water. I drink spring water anyway. I get my water from an artesian spring anyway, so I kind of avoid that. The mouthwash thing. I know mouthwash sucks, and I use it every day, and I haven't crossed that bridge yet, and I know that I need to. I love the feeling. I think a lot of people love the feeling of you wake up, your mouth feels a little bit weird. You want something to feel, cleaner, fresher, whatever. I know whatever they put in there is probably garbage. You're telling me, of course, all the bacteria. It's so critical to have that microbiome. Yet every single morning I do it anyway. I know I shouldn't. What would be an alternative for somebody like me who likes the feeling of having a fresh feeling mouth, knowing that, all the crap in our, oral care products is probably not great for us?
Yeah. That's the benefit of me spending 25 years in research and understanding how these pathways work. So we're trying to solve that riddle. In fact, we're not trying, we have solved that riddle. So number one, about 6 or 8 months ago, I launched a nitric oxide friendly toothpaste, a fluoride-free, microbiome-friendly toothpaste that leaves your mouth feeling fresh and minty and a clean, fresh breath. So that's number one. That's our Cardio Smile toothpaste. And what we're finding is that people who, and honestly, the people who were using the Colgates, the Aquafresh, the Crest, the fluoride toothpaste with all the chemicals, a lot of times it would leave your mouth dry because it's sterilizing your mouth, and the mouth is not meant to be sterile. So they would almost need to take a mouthwash to kind of rehydrate and leave their breath feeling fresh. But what we're finding is if you switch to our toothpaste, you get that nice, clean, fresh feeling breath. But for those that still want to use a mouth rinse, I've developed a nitric oxide microbiome friendly mouth rinse that we're going to launch probably in the next 3 to 4 months. But this has taken time because the goal is to how do we selectively kill the pathogenic bacteria, the bacteria that are causing periodontal disease and gingivitis, the bacteria that are causing cavities and caries and poor oral hygiene. So how do we selectively kill the bad guys while improving the diversity of the non-pathogenic commensal bacteria that are doing important metabolic activities for the human host? And so it took me many, many years to do this and doing through metagenomic analysis of tongue scraping and which bacteria are essential, what environment do they like, and then putting these components together in a mouth rinse that now we can use and improve oral hygiene, improve systemic health, and not lead to an antiseptic, sterile environment that decreases nitric oxide production and causes an increase in blood pressure. In fact, what we're finding now is that if people switch from their fluoridated toothpaste to our non-fluoridated nitric oxide friendly toothpaste, we see that their blood pressure becomes more normal. So think about this. Hypertension or high blood pressure is the number one driver of the number one killer of men and women worldwide. And yet 50% of the people that are treated for high blood pressure with prescription medication don't respond with better blood pressure because the hypertension we're finding is a symptom of oral dysbiosis. So if we can employ strategies to improve the diversity of the microbiome, for example, using our toothpaste, getting rid of antiseptic mouthwash, the microbiome changes, we improve nitric oxide production, blood pressure becomes normal. And if you look at the global public health impact of that, I mean, that's profound. It'll change the course and the trajectory of cardiovascular disease because we have to pay attention to the microbiome and get back to give the body what it needs, remove from the body what it doesn't need, and let the body work. Let the body do its job, and the body will heal itself.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. You've got a new customer. I'm going to be investing in some of that very, very soon. I love that. Okay. You also mentioned antacids, and maybe this is because have been in the nutrition space for a little while, where you learn about stomach acid, how acidic our stomach is. We don't even really align with carnivores as much as we line up with like scavengers as far as how acidic our stomachs are. To take an antacid to me sounds completely backwards. Like what was the primary reason why people were taking it, and why does it cause so many problems? It seems like by the nature of the thing that, yeah, that would kind of seem like the last thing most people would want to be doing.
Look, as a biochemist and physiologist, I can't think of a worse idea for human health than to suppress stomach acid production.
Wow.
It's the
Wow.
absolute worst. It's the beginning of human disease because our stomach is acidic for a reason. Our stomach has to be acidic to break down proteins into amino acids. We're humans. If we eat animal proteins or if we eat plant proteins, the human body is never intended to assimilate human or foreign proteins or plant or animal protein into the human body. No, what we do is we recycle those. We take those those plant or animal proteins in the stomach, break those down into the constituent amino acids. We absorb those amino acids, and the cell makes human proteins out of the amino acids from the plant or animal proteins. But without stomach acid, we can't break down proteins into amino acids. So then we get, undigested peptide fragments that are released into the gut. They're absorbed across the gut. Our body seizes as a foreign antigen, which it is, and we develop antibodies against it. So we develop foodborne allergies. We develop autoimmune disease because the body can't recognize self from non-self. That's just one part of the problem. The other issue is without stomach acid, we can't absorb basic micronutrients. And going back to the days of Linus Pauling, he famously said that chronic disease is caused from vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And again, if you can't make stomach acid, you can't absorb calcium, iron, iodine, selenium, chromium, B vitamins. And so we become completely nutrient deficient. Magnesium, for example, 75% of Americans are deficient in magnesium, 95% of Americans are deficient in iodine. And then when you look at the buffering of total body acid-base balance, we need that acid dump into the duodenum. We need that acid load because it signals the exocrine pancreas to release sodium bicarb to now buffer that acid that's been dumped from the stomach. And then that, stimulates, bile from the gallbladder and liver. And so it's the primary function of our entire digestive system. And without that signal, we develop pancreatitis, we develop metabolic acidosis because we can't buffer the acid base anymore. Because we lose the signal of acid being dumped into the duodenum to signal the pancreas, gallbladder. I mean, again, it's the absolute worst thing I could imagine for human health. And yet you don't even have to have a prescription to get an antacid anymore. You can go to the corner drugstore and take these proton pump inhibitors or H2 antagonists every day. And some people have been taking these for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And now there's clear data showing that people who have been on PPIs for 3 to 5 years have a 40% higher incidence of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. So these drugs are not just unhealthy, they're deadly. They're killing people. And we have to get these drugs off the market. They're more deadly than the COX-2 inhibitors, the Vioxx, Celebrex of 25 years ago. And those drugs were taken off the market, black box warning on them, and proton pump inhibitors are worse than they are.
Wow. Wow, that's absolutely crazy. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important information. You mentioned, the relationship of sugar, high carbohydrate diets. You're talking to a cohort of people that is largely, involved with low carbohydrate diets, ketogenic diets, carnivore diets. And also with people that are doing like a long-term carnivore diet. You've been mentioning microbiome and how important that is. Do you have any concerns with somebody who's doing a carnivore diet long-term and is not taking in any real measurable amount of plant material, again, to be a prebiotic, a probiotic, or anything? Do you have any concern with that?
Now, initially, I had some concerns because understanding how the body works on this. But here's what we're finding. There's a lot of confounding factors in dietary patterns and lifestyle habits of people who prescribe to a certain dietary pattern. So what we're finding is the people who are mainly ketogenic carnivore, they're very active, they're very health conscious, they don't smoke. Typically, they're not doing these things that are inhibiting the natural production of nitric oxide. So as long as we are not doing the things that are inhibiting the natural production of nitric oxide, like consuming a high sugar diet, which that's the absolute worst thing you can do. But because these people are active, they're getting good quality fats, they're getting high protein that their body can make into, improve protein synthesis and turn off protein breakdown. I think their body's adapted to that particular dietary lifestyle or dietary patterns, and your body adapts. Our body always adapts to environment in which it's given.
Okay, fair answer. I like that. Nobody who has undertaken a ketogenic or carnivore diet has ever been sad about going to the store to buy a little bit more bacon. We get to have some bacon in our diet. We thought it was bad for us. Now it's good. So we go and we look at the label, and there's the $4 package of bacon, and then there's the $10 package of bacon, and this says nitrate free. And so you have this idea, just like, oh, this package says low fat, this one says low cholesterol. Now this package says no nitrates involved in the curing of meat. And so but just that statement makes you think like, okay, this must be bad for you. Maybe I should be investing in products that have no
Yeah.
nitrate or nitrite or whatever the hell that is. Then you also hear that plant material, like celery, for example, has way more nitrate in it than even bacon does, and so you don't need to worry about it. So it creates this like hugely confusing thing where people think they need to be, avoiding nitrate or nitrite, and again, what that means, where do you find it, all that stuff. We mentioned in the introduction, like I said earlier, that it's actually something good for you that you've been, pursuing. Can you tell us what is up with that story?
Yeah. Again, we've been misled by mainstream media and big pharma. Now, this started, look, everything starts, I think, with a reason. In the 1950s, it was first discovered that nitrite cured meat, you could detect low molecular weight nitrosamines in that cured meat. And nitrosamines are known to cause cancer, primarily liver cancers. They're carcinogenic, mutagenic. They intercalate DNA and cause, missense translation. So then the thought was, okay, forms nitrosamines. Nitrosamines cause cancer, therefore nitrite causes cancer. It's a stretch. So in the early 2000s, the National Toxicology Program actually tested this. They're obligated to test any suspected carcinogen in human physiology. So in this multi-year dose escalation study in multiple animals models, they put nitrite to the test. Does it cause cancer in animal models? And the overwhelming evidence says nitrite does not increase risk of any cancers. In fact, in some cases, it has anti-cancer properties. And then if you look at a larger scale through large studies, epidemiological data, we know that people who eat a plant-based diet have lower incidence of cancers, right? There's some data out there with a very slight increase in relative risk, which relative risk is really, a way to statistically, I think, deceive or to misrepresent the actual data of absolute risk. But you'll read the literature saying people who eat cured and processed meats have a higher incidence of stomach cancers or gastrointestinal cancers. So then the nutritional epidemiologist, there has to be a biologically plausible mechanism. So their hypothesis was nitrite in cured and processed meat forms nitrosamines. Nitrosamines cause cancer. Therefore, people who eat cured meats cured with nitrite have higher incidence of cancers. If that were true, then we know that people who eat plant-based diet would have a 10-time higher rate of cancer because 85% of the nitrite and nitrate we get from our diet comes from vegetables, green leafy vegetables. Only 5% comes from cured meats. So we know it's just the opposite. And we published, I believe, in 2009 that, nitrite actually prevents cancer development, prevents primary tumor growth, and prevents the metastatic disease in patients or in conditions where there's a primary tumor that may become metastatic. So again, is an evolution of knowledge that's been slow to be able to communicate to the mass public because it goes against the dogma for the previous 50, 60 years. So people have to admit they were wrong. In fact, Walt Willett, who wrote a chapter in my book, Nitrite and Nitrate in Human Health and Disease, basically said that nitrite is not causing human cancers in cured meats. And in fact, I think in 2010, or 2000 and maybe it was 2008, 2007, we published a paper because we tested that. We went and bought the nitrite cured bacon versus the much higher no nitrite added cured bacon. What we found was that the no nitrite added bacon had 2 to 3 times higher nitrite than the nitrite cured bacon. Because these companies, it's deceptive marketing is really what it is. Because there's nitrite in cured meats. If there was no nitrite in cured meats, you couldn't sell it as a cured meat product. In fact, if you ate it, you'd probably develop foodborne illness. You'd have overgrowth of Listeria, Clostridium, all those foodborne pathogens. And nitrite is the only thing that will prevent overgrowth of Clostridium, Listeria, E. coli in cured meat, unrefrigerated, ready-to-eat meals. But what they're doing is they're taking a cultured celery extract, as you mentioned, which is high in nitrate, and then they add a starter culture of bacteria to convert the nitrate into nitrite. So they're still getting nitrite that's curing the meat, but because they're not adding sodium nitrite or potassium nitrite, they can put on the label that it's no nitrite added meat product.
Good marketing.
So it's good marketing, but I've consulted for these companies. I go, look, we're on the precipice of a change in paradigm. So you should market this as a health benefit of the bacon, of the lunch meat, because it has a cardioprotective molecule inherent in that. Now, look, it's not enough to see any therapeutic benefit because of so little residual nitrite is actually left in that cured meat product because it's bound to the heme iron of myoglobin to create that cured meat effect. But you should market that as a benefit, not shy away from it, because you're operating in a paradigm from 50 years ago. That we know different today because the science tells us different.
Hmm. Wow. Thank you for explaining that. I think a lot of people, including myself, get very confused about that. So really, really appreciate that. Of the other like lifestyle things that people can be doing to increase nitric oxide production naturally, are we talking exercise? Are we talking breathing techniques? Are we talking, sunlight? What, in your opinion, what are some of the higher priority things that people can be doing to increase nitric oxide production naturally?
Yeah, no, those are the top three you just mentioned. But again, you can do those things, but if you're using mouthwash, if you're eating a high carbohydrate, high sugar diet, if you're using antacids, you get zero nitric oxide benefit from exercise, nasal breathing, or sunlight exposure. So the most important thing you do is have to stop doing the things that disrupt nitric oxide production. Get rid of fluoride, stop using mouthwash, wean off antacids, and stop eating foods that cause an increase in blood sugar. Continuous glucose monitors are readily available. I encourage everybody to do that. If what you just ate causes an increase in blood sugar, don't eat it again. But yeah, so if you stop doing the things that inhibit the natural production, now you can exercise. Exercise is medicine because it stimulates and activates nitric oxide production. And we used to say 20 to 30 minutes of moderate physical exercise, but today we know that just a few minutes of high intensity interval training is enough. If you increase your heart rate, increase your breath rate, it can stimulate and activate nitric oxide production. And then if you can practice nasal breathing during that process, there's the enzyme nitric oxide synthase is found in the epithelial cells of our upper airways. And when we do nasal breathing and it improves nitric oxide production, we deliver that to the airways, we dilate the bronchioles, we dilate the pulmonary arteries. So now we're getting more efficient oxygen exchange. Um, and then, as you mentioned, 20, 30 minutes of sunlight a day. And really, I like the first sunlight because there's certain wavelengths of light that can activate nitric oxide release from NO bound to metals or NO bound to thiols on proteins. And that's why sunlight can lower blood pressure because it's releasing nitric oxide.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Thank you for explaining that. You also have developed products. You mentioned before several of them that you developed. But there might be somebody out there that's thinking, oh, like, no worries. I already have my bodybuilding friend. He gave me this gummy that I take that has creatine in it and all these amazing things, including nitric oxide. So I've got that base covered. I don't need to worry about your product because I'm already taking it. What have you noticed in the supplemental field that makes you a little frustrated to hear something like that?
Well, there are a lot of companies out there with big coffers of advertising money who market as nitric oxide but have no idea about the real science of nitric oxide. Again, nitric oxide is a gas. It's not a pill you can swallow. It's not a gum. I mean, a gummy, let's think of what a gummy is. You mentioned creatine in gummies. Gummy is sugar and seed oils. Do Americans really need more sugar and seed oils? The other thing is too is when you put something like creatine in a gummy or a chew, the sugar binds to that. So the body doesn't even recognize the creatine that's formed inside that gummy. So you basically inactivated the ingredient that you're taking through a gummy. About 12 years ago, there was this new fad of delivering nutrients through gummies and chews. These companies are always looking for new sexy ways to deliver vitamins and minerals. But again, just like giving antacids to the human, I can't think of a worse way to deliver nutrients than put it in a chew or a gummy. It's the absolute worst thing we can do for human biology. But going back to that, so again, a lot of these companies have no idea about the real science of nitric oxide. It's deceptive marketing and it's fraudulent because again, beets are not nitric oxide. You see these commercials about beets. Well, there's take this beets and it's nitric. It's not the beets. In fact, most beets, we use commercial beet products as placebos in our clinical trials because they provide no nitric oxide benefit. And it's a perfect placebo because you have to understand what's in the beets and how the body metabolizes it. And in fact, the reason people are deficient in nitric oxide is they're unable to utilize any nitrate that may be found in beets because they're using mouthwash, fluoride, or antacids. And in the pre-workout space, there's products that contain arginine and citrulline. But these are semi-essential amino acids that human body is never deficient in these. So you don't need to supplement because the reason people are nitric oxide deficient is they've lost the ability to convert the arginine that's already in the cell into nitric oxide. Giving more arginine doesn't fix the enzyme. In fact, it can make it worse. So all these products out there, the beet products, the gummies, chews, they're absolutely useless. They provide zero nitric oxide benefit. And then the arginine and citrulline products, again, are absolutely useless because they do not provide the body with nitric oxide, especially if they have endothelial dysfunction and the enzyme isn't working. And that's the frustration because there's companies out there marketing these, advertising these every day on TV, radio, and they're selling it as a nitric oxide product. And it's not only disingenuous, but it's dangerous for the entire industry because I get emails every day and people go, Nathan, we heard you on a podcast and you talk about nitric oxide, but nitric oxide doesn't work for me. And I go, what do you mean nitric oxide doesn't work for me? Like I've been taking this beet product I saw advertised on TV for the past couple of years, and it doesn't seem to work for me. So nitric oxide doesn't work in my body. And I go, nitric oxide always works in your body. That company failed you. That product failed you because that product it doesn't deliver nitric oxide because it can't deliver nitric oxide. Because these people don't understand the true science of why people are nitric oxide deficient. And if you don't understand the science, how in the hell can you develop a product that addresses the root cause? And the short answer is they can't. These companies have no idea. They hire these cardiologists, they hire these people, these talking heads who have never published a paper on nitric oxide. They've never spent a single minute in the research lab understanding the biochemistry and physiology or enzymology of nitric oxide. So how can you develop a nitric oxide product? You can't. And so I think that's what my objective is how do we convey the truth? How do we convey the real science so that consumers understand what products work, what products don't work, and that they're not defrauded by these companies out there trying to sell them a bill of goods.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining that. I think anybody who is listening or watching can understand that you have a real talent for understanding the science, but also putting it in terms that people can understand and follow along with. And so my last question is more related to your book. What was it like to be able to convey that message in the form of a book to the lay person who can really understand the stuff?
Well, I spent, again, 20 years in academia and I've published over 100 peer-reviewed papers in the scientific literature. And so these are seminal discoveries that we published. But what I found was, physicians and scientists read the medical literature, but lay people typically aren't reading scientific papers in medical and scientific journals. So what I had to do was, how do we take this complex science and then convey that and tell that story in an easy read and in a very complex science? And how do we, distill it down into something that most people, let's say at a sixth grade level, can understand, appreciate, and comprehend so that they can take corrective actions if they're doing these things. But the other thing that I thought was important was and most people don't want to buy a science book, but this is also my journey or story of personal discovery. And we talked about it going, my life growing up and what led me into this field. But I'm very proud of this book and my agent Alan Morrell and the Brick Tower Press. They've done a great job. But it's The Secret of Nitric Oxide: Bring the Science to Life. But to address these frustrations that I deal with, and hopefully building trust with the reader that there are a lot of companies out there selling really good products. Don't get me wrong there, and we need good quality products and vitamins and minerals and supplements. And there are a lot of good companies out there selling really good high quality products. But these companies really have no business selling a nitric oxide product. And so if you want nitric oxide, I think it's important that you trust a company that knows what they're doing, because again, if you don't know what you're doing, you can cause a lot of harm. And so that was my objective, is to convey the real science of nitric oxide, but really tell an inspirational story of, look, I'm not unique. Everybody encounters problems and hurdles and resistance and opposition in life. And, part of that story is to I hope to motivate people, inspire people to, no matter what the hurdles may be in front of you, and they may seem insurmountable and people come after you and make you a target, but stick to your guns, keep going. Because if people are coming after you and ridiculing you and opposing you, then you're on the precipice of a breakthrough. And so I encourage people, keep going, no matter what's in front of you. Keep your dreams alive and be persistent and be disciplined and keep going.
I absolutely love that. What a great way to end this conversation on such a fascinating topic. Thank you so very much for all the knowledge you brought to us today. This is so critical and I think very poorly understood out there. So you being able to break this down for us has been super, super helpful. We're very, very grateful for you and your time. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work? Where can they find the book and where can they find your products?
Yeah, I encourage everyone to read the book. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or nathansbook.com is a link you can go to that'll redirect you. But I encourage people to subscribe to my YouTube channel. We provide content, education, information on the science of nitric oxide. It's Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, Nitric Oxide on YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. Twitter, I'm Dr. Nitric, or X now, Dr. Nitric. And I'm searchable on most search engines. And then for those interested in our product technology, it's n101.com. The letter N, number one, letter O, number one.com.
Awesome. We will link all that up to make it easy for people to find those resources. And again, such a wonderful topic that you've been able to enlighten us on today. Thank you so very much for all your years of research and for, again, being able to disseminate that down to us so that it's very understandable has been a real gift. So thank you so very much for everything you do. And thank you for taking time to be on our show today, Dr. Bryan. It's been a real pleasure.
Casey, thank you so much for helping us tell our story.
Absolutely. It was an honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.